about 3 times. How are you all? I'm so impressed, as officially the doors don't open until 2 o'clock, but anyone's here at all. But it's lovely to see you. How are you? Good. Well, there's no one here who's going to interrogate me before I open the floor to questions, so I shouldn't think there's anyone who doesn't know, since you're actually here, but I was the 5th Doctor. And I grew up watching the series. I think I was just about 12 years old when it started. So I remember watching William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton. And then I kind of drifted off into the world of girlfriends and college and stuff like that. So I didn't really watch much of the later. I didn't really watch John Pertwee that much, occasionally, and Tom Baker. And then one day, after I'd done a series called All Creatures Great and Small, I got a phone call from John Nathan Turner, who I'd worked with on All Creatures, and he'd left to become the producer of Doctor Who, and he asked me how I felt about being the next Doctor. And I was pretty dumbfounded, because I'd grown up with William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton. I never imagined I would actually be offered the part of the Doctor. But it's kind of, in a mafia sense, an offer you can't refuse. And so I accepted, and if you told me in 2016 I would be sitting here in Salt Lake City, I'd have laughed hysterically at the time. But here I am. So, fortunately, because when I left the series, I was lucky enough to get another job almost immediately. It meant that I never felt the need to distance myself from the programme. I certainly didn't want to, but because I managed to sort of move on fairly effectively, and have done ever since, I have always maintained a fairly close tie with the series. And of course, we do these the audio shows called Big Finish, and that's great. And I was lucky enough in 2007, I think I'm right, 2007, to be asked back to do a 10-minute special in the middle of one of David Tennant's seasons called Time Crash. And little did I know when I did that about a couple of years later he would be my son-in-law. It's extraordinary. And so we started a kind of dynasty. And I often liken it to the North Korean dynasty, in that my son certainly wants to be the next Doctor, or one of the Doctors in the future. I know David's son does, so nobody else is going to get a look in until at least 2050. And a couple of years ago, I'll shut up in a minute and let you ask questions. But a couple of years ago, for the 50th anniversary special, for the 50th anniversary year, I should say, I made my own special, which I'm very happy to say went down rather well. And it was actually wonderful. We had an enormous amount of fun making it, and on the night of the 50th anniversary special, I think in Britain, the Five-ish Doctors reboot, which is what it was called, was made available, I think, at about 10:30. And we were at a convention in London for the 50th anniversary. And Colin, Sylvester and myself sat in the hotel bar until about 2 o'clock in the morning, reading all these wonderful tweets and messages that were put up online, feeling very proud of ourselves. So, thank you very much. Anyway, I don't know if anyone after that has any questions. If they don't, I'll just leave quietly. But if you do, please go to a microphone near. That's it. Perfect.
In All Creatures Great and Small, what was perhaps the most uncomfortable or disgusting thing you had to do?
Yes. Well, of course. I had no idea when I said yes to the part of Tristan in All Creatures Great and Small that how realistic it was going to be. Because shortly before the filming we went up and we joined a real vet in the Yorkshire Dales who showed us exactly what they did, what he did on his rounds, and it seemed to me to consist mostly of standing in the cold with your arm up a cow. And I couldn't quite believe that they were actually going to ask us to do this. I thought perhaps they would get a special effect or something, but of course it was the BBC and there was no money for that. So, and worse than that, because in the late 1970s, when the series was made, and they were examining a cow, they put on a long rubber glove and then put their arm up a cow. Unfortunately, in the 30s, when the series was set, they didn't have rubber gloves. You literally had a bucket of hot water and you soaked your arm and then up you went. And it's how they spend most of their lives, as far as I could see. You know, if the cow has a sore throat, up the arm goes. I've never quite understood it, but it seems the basic way of diagnosing any ailment the cow has. And the first day I had to do it was a particularly windy day on the Yorkshire Dales, and I was stripped to the waist, as that's what the vets used to do, and literally the only warm part of my body was my arm. I want you to hold that thought in your head. Anyway, that was probably about the worst thing we had to do, but it was a joy to make. Thank you.
When you got the script for when Adric died, was that a shock to you?
For what, sorry?
In Doctor Who, when Adric died.
Adric, yes.
Was that a shock, or did you know the actor was leaving?
I knew the plan, I must admit. John had come to me and said, initially, there was some talk when I took over. You know, the TARDIS was very full. We had Tegan, Nyssa, and Adric, and I think John was aware that one of them had to go. And the first candidate, I think, was Nyssa. But I was not really for that, because I kind of liked Nyssa. At the time, she seemed to be the only person who wanted to be there. Because Adric was trying to get back into E-space, and Janet just never wanted to be anywhere. Then he came to me and said, look, I've got this idea. I think we're going to kill off Adric. So I knew really before Matthew. I must admit, at the time when he suggested it to me, I thought it was quite a good idea. I mean, it was an exit that no one would ever forget. It was an heroic death. I think probably it was a mistake. I've come to realize over the years that it traumatized quite a lot of people. And so maybe we didn't realize the full effect of what we were doing. I still think it was a very moving episode, great climax to the story. Matthew wasn't very happy about it. He was mostly unhappy because it meant he could never return. Although actually he did, weirdly, about 2 stories later. But yeah, I think probably on reflection it wasn't a great idea. There's quite a funny story actually, because when the series came back, and Rose was the companion, and Russell T Davies, who'd been a fan of the series growing up, big fan of the series, was the producer. My own children, my 2 boys, who were maybe, I don't know, about sort of 7 and 9 then, or maybe less than that, they became very attached to the character of Rose. And there was a rumor that went out that Rose was going to die in the following week's episode. And my 2 children were distraught about this. So I sent an email to Russell T Davies and said, could you just tell me, is it true that Rose dies in next week's episode? Because, if it's true, I don't think I should let my children watch it. And he sent me a reply which just said, you killed Adric, what do you care? And it was at that point I realized maybe we pushed it too far.
Thank you.
Cheers.
So my question is, what was it like working on Miranda? Also, I wish you were my French teacher.
Miranda, yes. I did an episode of a BBC comedy series called Miranda. At the time, I had no idea. No one had any idea of how popular this series would become. And in the episode, I did lose my trousers. It is, my children think, the most embarrassing thing they've ever seen in their life. So I suppose I'm a bit torn. I love doing it. I think she's hysterically funny, and it was hugely enjoyable to make. But yeah, I don't regret doing it. I loved it, but it is out there. You know, it's a bit like me. You know, years ago I did my very first television part actually was a part in a series called The Tomorrow People. And in it, I had a blonde curly wig and sort of lycra swimming trunks and little else. And the only redeeming feature about it was I thought no one would ever see this again. Because in those days, they showed things once and that was it, you never saw them again. I hadn't counted on the invention of the VHS tape and DVDs. And indeed Nickelodeon, because I think first of all it was sold to Nickelodeon. That's where I first heard it was available, to my horror. So me with no trousers on in an episode of Miranda will probably haunt me for the rest of my life, but I love doing it. Hello.
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 I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
And the question is...
Okay, take a deep breath, Superwoman. You can do it.
I really do love you. I love your work.
Hmm?
I really do love your work.
Thank you.
Okay. What was the most funniest thing that happened on set of Doctor Who?
The funniest thing?
Yes.
Whoa, that's difficult. We had a rather eccentric makeup woman once who persuaded me I should dress up as Tegan and go onto the set. And so she backcombed my hair. That's nothing you'll ever see. So it wasn't that, but it was very enjoyable. But I was told off for it and told to go back into costume. Let me see. I think, it wasn't really funny, but I just remember this event in the last story I did, Caves of Androzani. There was a scene we filmed in a sandpit where I had to carry Nicola Bryant across this sandpit to the TARDIS and then take her inside. And because of one thing or another, because these technical people can never get it right, I had to do it about 5 or 6 times. And the very last time we did it, which is the take that's on the actual show, you see me carry her across, and by this time, Nicola, I mean, she's a very sweet girl, and she's not particularly heavy, but 5 or 6 times over a distance of 200 yards is quite a lot. And as I reached the TARDIS in the last take, I just dropped her. And if you look very carefully, you can see her my arms give way, basically, and she just falls to the ground. And they had to remove the bump as she hit the ground out of the take, and that's what you see. I think there was a slight squeal as well as she hit the ground. She was a bit surprised. But I kept a straight face, and then we carried on. But there were lots of very funny moments. I mean, there was a moment when I think I had to jump into the water at one point, and then sort of stick my head above water and say something. And we shot it at a naval diving training school near Portsmouth in Britain. And they poured the water into this big vat the night before. Well, no, they were meant to have done it 2 days before, because weirdly, if you take water out of the sort of the cistern, it's actually freezing cold, and they have to leave it for a couple of days until it raises to a tolerable temperature. Unfortunately, they'd forgotten to fill it. So they only did it that morning, and so when I jumped into it, I had no idea how high your voice becomes when you, when you jump into a big vat of freezing cold water. I think I actually had to dub the line in the end, because I was talking like that. Anyway, thank you.
Hi, so I was just wondering, so my dad grew up watching Tom Baker and Your Doctor, and when it came back and he heard it was coming back, he basically sat my little 8-year-old butt down on the couch and said, "Sit down, shut up, and watch this." And I've been a fan ever since. So I was just wondering what it feels like to know that a show that you did back in the 60s 60s, if I remember.
Well, yes, it was a little bit late. I did it in 81. It started in the
That's right,
60s.
that's right.
It's just I'm not quite that old. I'm almost that old, but...
See, and that's why I was like second-guessing myself. I was like, that math is not adding up. Anyway, I was just wondering what you thought of this show that was so long ago, and suddenly there's like this new, like people who weren't even alive when that version was on, now suddenly just going crazy over it. And what do you think of like the mania that's taken over Doctor Who?
Well, of course I love it because you lot come and see me. And it's very hard to keep your feet on the ground. I mean, I'm very aware it's because I played the Doctor, but somebody asked me this morning in one of the press conferences, you know, he said, well, I know what the fans get out of it, but what do you get out of it? I said, well, people turn up and tell me how great I am. What do you mean, what do I get out of it? It's obvious. It's a huge ego boost. Who wouldn't travel thousands of miles to have lots and lots of people come up and, you know, look adoringly at you? It's very nice. I'm under no illusion it's only because I was the Doctor, but it's still very nice. No, it is an odd feeling, yes, because when the series initially came back, you know, no one really, the younger people didn't really know about Doctor Who. It wasn't until that first season ended, Christopher Eccleston's season ended, and after 13 weeks of Doctor Who, they had nothing to watch. They actually started to go back and watch the old Doctors, the classic Doctors, and because Chris Eccleston wasn't that old, a lot of them in Britain gravitated towards my Doctor because I was, you know, nearer that age. Of course there was a slight problem in that I remember I used to go and pick my child up from school. I remember one day a small boy came out and I was talking to his mother, you know, while we waited for them to come out. And as they came out, she said to the child, look, here's the Doctor you were looking at last night. And he looked up and went, where? Because he hadn't quite figured out that it was, you know, 25 years before. But still, it's very nice that there was a great interest in the old series, the classic series, as we've now been designated, the classic series. And I'm very happy to come along here and just bask in the warm light of fandom. So it's great.
Thank you for coming.
Hi.
Hello. I like how you were the Doctor and everything.
Yes, I was.
Yes. So, in your mind, who was the best Doctor that came after you? And why?
Came after me?
Yes.
Well, I'm probably a bit biased here. And as long as you promise not to tell Sylvester, I'd have to say it would be David Tennant. I think he. You know, listen. That's not to say anyone has been bad, and I've liked all the Doctors, and I suppose what it was about David, you know, he came after Chris Eccleston, who was good, very good, excellent, but I think what was missing was he wasn't a huge fan of the series. That's, I suppose, and we knew that, and he made that kind of very, very clear. So I think that affected certainly when I watched it a bit. And the thing about David was, you know, he was very successful when he took over that part. And I was very surprised that he actually accepted it, but he accepted it because he is a huge Doctor Who fan, and the opportunity to play the Doctor himself was something he had dreamt of for years and years. I think that enthusiasm and the love of the series came over in that performance, and that's why I think he was terrific. And of course, you know, I mentioned earlier, I referred to Time Crash. The reason that script was written was because David had been talking to Stephen Moffat and explained how he'd grown up loving this series. And what was brilliant about Time Crash was he worked on two levels. It was the 10th Doctor remembering being the 5th Doctor, and it was David Tennant remembering watching me on the television. So I think he was a great Doctor. But I am biased.
In your opinion, who do you think should come after Capaldi?
Ooh. Me? You could then have, if it wasn't for Matt Smith, you could have one of the youngest Doctors and then one of the oldest Doctors. I think that'd be quite good, wouldn't it? I know. I'll suggest it to someone. I don't know. I'm not in that. But if I was the showrunner, I would be in that position to cast myself. No, I don't know. It's Chris Chibnall now, so I think he'll choose his own Doctor, and I'm sure he'll take advice on it. But in the end, I think they make pretty good choices. There's always the same names come up. They're always the rumour mill gets going when a new Doctor they're looking for a new Doctor. But I think in the end, the choices are pretty good.
You mentioned William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton, so I was curious if either of their portrayals of the Doctor affected the way you played it, and if not, how did you create your characterization of the Doctor?
I watched William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton. I think my favourite Doctor was Patrick Troughton. He seemed to me, he had the most difficult job of any of the Doctors, really, because no one envisaged anyone ever doing that part, and no one really thought it would be as successful as it was. So when William Hartnell played the part, to me he was the Doctor for 3 years, and then he became basically too ill to carry on, and rather than dump the series, they came up with the idea of regeneration, and Patrick Troughton was cast. And I remember thinking, oh no, this is a terrible idea. And then I sat down and watched Patrick's first episode, and within the course of that one episode, he had created a unique and very different Doctor. But he had won over all the fans that William Hartnell had had and more. And he had a certain quality which I think went missing a bit, a certain vulnerability about his Doctor. And that's really what I grabbed hold of and what I wanted to bring back into the Doctor's character. A little of the vulnerability and a little of the, he was less assured about what he was doing. And I think that it's somehow gone missing a bit through John Pertwee and Tom Baker. Not that it was their portrayals were absolutely fine. I just felt I liked that in Patrick Troughton, and I wanted to bring that back a little.
Thank you.
Being the Doctor, obviously, it's had an impact on all of us, as well as all of the other roles you have done as well. In fact, from one of my friends, you are her Doctor. My main question is, being the Doctor and doing all the different parts, what is the aspect that has affected you the most from it, from the fan interaction?
In my career, my life, really, well, it's hard to know, because I can't really imagine my life without Doctor Who now. It's so much a part of it, and as I said, I thought when I left Doctor Who, I might do the odd convention here and then. By that time, the convention circuit was up and running. But I thought I would then just go off and carry on my career and not really have Doctor Who impinge on it very much. But that was very wrong. And in fact, still when I walk down the street in Britain, people will call out, "Where's your TARDIS?" Which is very comforting. But I managed somehow to carry on and do many other series in Britain. But an essential part of that was the fact that I was the Doctor, and I think it's, as I say, I can't really imagine life without it, is the truth. So it's hard to say, but I'm very, grateful for it. It's in a way, I said to Peter Capaldi, when I was on the program when Peter was announced as the next Doctor, and they said to us at the end, just go on and shake him by the hand. So we all went on, and I remember shaking him by the hand, and just leaning over and saying, "You'll never ever leave this job." And he looked at me rather quizzically, but then I interviewed him later on, and he said, "You're quite right." It's the job that keeps on giving.
Hello, Doctor.
Hi. Nice outfit, by the way.
Thank you.
Excellent choice, man. What am I saying?
I wouldn't choose any other. I love your doctor. You're my doctor,
Thank
pretty
you.
much. And I just want to ask about Big Finish, and because I watched all your episodes, and I was really sad when they were over, and actually cried at Cave Sandrazani. But then I realized there was Big Finish, and I love all of it. Nissa getting all her stories, and Aramim, and I'm just kind of wondering, what's your favorite aspect of Big Finish? Like, is it new companions, new characters, new stories? Just kind of want to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, of course, they came along, and I don't think this was their intention, but I think they kept the series alive when it was off the air. And I think they did a fantastic job. And I was talking to Nick Briggs the other day about it. He's one of the executives, and about whether life was better, because before Doctor Who returned, they had pretty much a free hand. You know, they would commission the scripts, and then they'd go out and make them. And when Doctor Who returned, everything had to go back through the Doctor Who office to ensure continuity, I guess. But what that meant was, Big Finish is now very integral to Doctor Who itself, and it's accepted as a very important part of it. It's made Paul McGann so much more part of the Doctor Who canon. It's given Colin Baker a chance to extend his Doctor beyond the short seasons that he did. So I think it's done an enormous amount of good. I love doing the stories. I think generally they're of a very, very high standard, the stories themselves. How well we do them, I don't know. I don't actually ever get around to listening to them that much. Since my children got older, in the old days, I just put one on in the car, and it would shut them up for hours on end. It was brilliant. Now they've got a bit older, and they're on their iPads or their phones or whatever. I don't get the chance to do that. We do them very quickly, so I don't. If you were to ask me, and please don't, which is my favourite, I would just answer spare parts because I'm told it's really good. But a lot of them I can't remember that well, but I'm aware when we're doing them that they're great, because audio, you can do so much on audio. You can have fantastic special effects on audio because it's all inside your head. So I love doing them, and I'm very happy to carry on doing them. And I think, generally speaking, the collaboration with the Doctor Who office itself has been generally good for the programme, and means that better writers want to write for Big Finish. So it's been great.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello, Peter. What can you tell us about your new autobiography?
Oh, my autobiography. Oh, yes. Well, I'm writing it now. I'm downstairs. I've got to deliver it by the end of April. What am I going to do? I've still got 20 years of my life unaccounted for.
Well, we're waiting for all of it. We're waiting for all of it.
Well, it's hopefully going to be out in October. I know it was meant to be. It was meant to be earlier than that, but then we had a slight crisis with the original publishers. That's them now doing that, because they didn't like the title. They didn't like the title that I had, and and I suppose originally when I started off, I was going to go very much for just the Doctor Who angle. In fact, I thought it would be quite good to call it Peter Davison Autobiography, Volume 3, The Doctor Who Years, which would mean that I wouldn't have to write about anything else before or after. Unless, of course, it was such a blockbuster that they then said, could you go back and fill in the gaps? But when I sat down to write it, you know, I found that I'd done quite a lot more than Doctor Who, and it was quite interesting writing about my parents, because my father was actually, oddly enough, looking at me, West Indian. And he was in the Caribbean, and he wasn't white, so he was mixed race, and so it was a bit odd how I ended up like me, and looked like my mother. That's how. But it was quite interesting writing about his life and, you know, my childhood, and then All Creatures, and obviously Doctor Who, but then other things that I've done since. So I then came up with a different title, which they weren't very happy with. So they then said, basically, they weren't going to have that title. So we said, well, I don't want you to publish it then. And we moved on to someone else who was more receptive. And so it should be out in October, hopefully. I don't know what it'll be like, because I'm doing it myself. You know, the original idea was they sent me what they call a ghostwriter. I think quite a lot of people have these ghostwriters who sort of sit down, they talk to you, and then they go off and write the book. And I said, well, I'd rather like to try and write it myself. And he said, okay, that's fine. So I did. And at which point he said, I never thought you were going to do that, because everyone says that. And they end up, you know, getting me to write it. So it may be terrible, but at least I've written it.
It will not.
Okay. Oh, yes, sorry.
Hello.
Hi.
So here in the States, our access to television from the UK is very erratic and bizarrely curated. And so I'm familiar with All Creatures Great and Small and Doctor Who, but I know that you've had a very long and distinguished career. And I'm interested, what is it that you have done that you're very proud of, that you think that fans might not have heard of, and should go looking for and make the effort to find?
Well, I did a series called A Very Peculiar Practice, which obviously someone has heard of. And it was written by a man called Andrew Davis, who is a very famous scriptwriter in Britain. He adapts mostly. He adapted the original, what's it called? Oh Lord, it's gone out of my head. You know, the series about Washington, what's the, House of Cards. He adapted the original British version of House of Cards, and his name is still on the American one. And he wrote this series, one of the very few things, original screenplays he wrote, which was Very Peculiar Practice. And it was set in a university. I was a university doctor, yet another doctor. But it was excellent. And it was one of those series, and they're quite rare in television, where you get the script and you don't want to change a word of it. You know, you just think it's so well written. Whether that's available in America, I don't know. I did another series called At Home with the Braithwaites, which I know was shown over here, but I don't think it was outstandingly successful. But it's a brilliantly written series about a family that wins £38 million on the Euro lottery, and how it's a comedy, surprisingly enough, and it's about how that amount of money affects a dysfunctional family in a funny way. And I did a series called The Last Detective, which was, I think that was quite popular over here. I went into Barnes and Noble the other day, and they had all 4 volumes of it. I was very impressed. So I've done quite a few. Well, then I did Law and Order UK as well, but I just popped into that really. But it was fun, and I think that was quite popular in the US because you love the wigs. Your law may be interesting over here, but you don't have the wigs. But that was fun to do. So I suppose they would be my most. Oh, and Campion. Actually, this was called Campion. That was very popular over here. I think it went under the Masterpiece Theatre headline, whatever it is. So that was good. So I've done a fair amount of stuff that's gone out in the US. I know Campion and certainly The Last Detective are available over here. So that's something to look at.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
So first of all, I have to thank you for introducing me to Doctor Who, because of late nights staying up on Saturday night and watching PBS and seeing this weird show that sparked my imagination, and the fact that there was celery on someone's lapel.
Yes.
It just seemed weird enough to get me.
A decorative vegetable, as Mr. Tennant so kindly has pointed out.
The question I have is, you mentioned the whole dynasty you would love for your family to have of Doctor Who. What was your reaction when you found out that your daughter was going to appear on the show you had done so long ago?
Well, she actually, funny enough, Georgia for many years, although she did drama at school, absolutely refused to contemplate becoming an actress. I certainly wasn't encouraging her. I mean, it's a very precarious profession for anyone, being an actor. And I was quite happy for her to go off and find something, that she wanted to do. Something was more stable. And then one day, I think when she was about 18, she suddenly turned around and said, I've decided to become an actress. So I sat her down and said, look, that's fine, but you have to understand, it's going to be a matter of persevering, because things don't happen quickly, and there's going to be a lot of rejection you're going to have to put up with. And the next day she went for her first audition and got the job. So much for Dad's advice. Then one day she actually went up, along with hundreds of others, for the part of Rose. She didn't get down to the last few, but I know they saw her for it. And then I suppose about 2 years after that, when David was the Doctor, she went out for another part in a story, and she rang me up and said, they offered me the part in this particular Doctor Who story, but they've said, if I wait, she said, if I wait, there's a better part coming along later in the season. What should I do? So I said, well, if they're saying it's a better part, maybe you should wait. So that's what she did. She said, okay, well, I won't accept this part. I'll wait for later on in the season. And of course, when that story came along, it was called The Doctor's Daughter, which I thought was probably a better title, not necessarily a better part. Because obviously, there were certain attractions to having Georgia playing the part of the Doctor's daughter. And of course, it turned out that she was David Tennant's daughter, as well as being my daughter. And then, just to go off tangentially, when I then had to make the speech at as the father of the bride at the wedding, I started off and tried to explain this, really what I've been explaining to you, and then decided I had to stop at the point when it seemed that my daughter had married me. Anyway, no, I was very pleased. I was very pleased that she got a part in Doctor Who, because it seemed perfect. The story was called The Doctor's Daughter. I didn't realise the consequences of her playing in that part. In fact, neither did she, funnily enough, because although she met David there, they didn't start going out then. She just. I remember she rang me up about 2 or 3 months later and said, David Tennant keeps ringing me up and asking me out to the theatre. What should I do? And I said, well, if you want to go out, go out. I said, isn't it obvious that he likes you? She said, oh, no, he doesn't like me. No. He just keeps wanting to take me to the theatre. And so I'm trying to explain to my daughter that David possibly is, in some ways, is attracted to her, but she wouldn't have it. And the next thing is there, suddenly it turns out they do like each other, and they're kind of getting married. So Dad knows best. Oh, was that been 5 more minutes? Okay, right.
I'll try to make this fast. By the way, hi, it is awesome to see you.
Thank you.
So, I was wanting to ask you a question as a writer. I know a lot of the fans probably have issues with Moffat, and I was wondering, who's your favorite writer for the show? Did they write your favorite episode? And how do you feel about some of the story arcs that have been going on?
This is a very difficult question to
I'm
answer
sorry.
because I think that, I mean, Stephen is the biggest Doctor Who fan in the world. I think, and if you ask me which was my favourite story, it would be a Stephen Moffat story, but it wouldn't be actually from his time as the showrunner. I think The Empty Child is one of the great Doctor Who stories. I think possibly, I think he gets so excited sometimes, Stephen, that he makes it a little complicated. That's all. For people like me, you know, I used to be, in my time when I was a doctor, I used to be really good at figuring out what was going in Doctor Who stories, what was going on. I would sometimes spend hours explaining to my directors what the story was about. And this may be an age thing, but recently I found myself turning to my two sons as we sit on the sofa watching Doctor Who and going, what's going on? So it's a very difficult question. I think he writes, he's a fantastic writer. I wonder sometimes if he just gets a little too obsessed with the complications of Doctor Who and makes it a little more difficult for your average viewer, your casual viewer, to understand the story. That's all. But I still would say he's written some of the best Doctor Who stories there are. Has that sidestepped the question sufficiently? But it's what I do believe. I mean, I loved Russell T Davies's time as a series because I think he managed to make it very open to everyone. And I'm sure people had issues with Russell T Davies as well. And I think that. But I think he's a great writer, Stephen. But sometimes I just wish he'd make it easier for, you know, dummies like me to understand.
You're not dummy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Right, quick fire. Right, quick fire questions. Yeah. Yes, sir. Tilt that microphone down.
Who was your favorite doctor besides you?
The favorite doctor's what?
Who was your favorite doctor besides you?
Besides me? Well, I suppose there's Mr. Tennant, I suppose. He would have to come into it somewhere. Patrick Troughton, Sylvester, because he's here today. Oddly, last week it was Colin Baker, because he was... No, I suppose my favourite doctor is, I'd have to say, is Patrick Troughton, because I grew up watching him.
Where the Five-ish Doctors reboot was your idea?
Yes, it was.
I just wanted to say how brilliant I thought
it was. Thank you very much.
And especially the way you ended up being part of the 50th anniversary, because every time you see that scene, you're going to think of all your wonderful classic doctors.
Exactly! Thank you very much. If you haven't seen the Five-ish Doctors reboot, go and see it now. Right, okay, yes sir, Vicky. Question?
What was your favorite enemy when you were the Doctor?
Okay, honestly, I think my favourite enemy were the Cybermen. I loved the Cybermen when I was growing up. I know the stock answer would be Daleks, but I loved the Cybermen. I remember them vividly growing up, and I thought the Cybermen during my time were particularly good. So yes. Another question? Anybody else? Yes?
So obviously, during the 50th anniversary special, one of the biggest surprises was that Tom Baker showed up at the end.
Yes.
As the mysterious curator, and we never really did get to understand what was going on with that.
No.
If you were offered a similar role as with a cameo, would you take it?
Like a shot. In fact, I don't know what Tom Baker was doing in that story, but I said to Colin last week, if he was still there in his older form, then so are we somewhere. Yeah. Yes.
Which of your storylines would you most like to see exterminated and why?
Well, that's a difficult one. No, this is not really, I'm going to dodge the answer again. I'd like to have redone Time Flight, because I don't think we did it very well. I think it was actually rather a neat idea, but we were running out of budget in this thing, and we just did it with models of Concorde and things like that. And the Heathrow was just nonsense. And, there were rocks everywhere. How could you land a Concorde in the middle of rocks? It just didn't make any sense and wasn't thought through, so I didn't think we did it justice. Whether I'd like to see it exterminated entirely is another matter. Yes, sir. You made me the last question.
How did you make the inside of the TARDIS?
How did I make the inside of the TARDIS? How did I make it? With plywood and cardboard and lots of red buttons. And no, there's a great guy who remade my TARDIS console for the Doctor Who experience in Cardiff, and it's fantastic. I'm rather partial to it, actually, my TARDIS console, although I appreciate it's not a match on the more modern, multi-level TARDIS consoles. I thought they did a rather nice idea in Time Crash, where it said basically that we'd updated the thing. It was almost like a computer. What was it they called it? Desktop. We'd updated the desktop. I rather like my desktop, although it was very retro. Just another word for being old-fashioned and out of date, really. But yeah, I did it. I rather liked it. It was minimalistic, wasn't it? It was a minimalist with a little coat stand in the corner. Did you like it? There was an issue with the door because, of course, now in the modern TARDIS, the door opened straight from the TARDIS console room into the outside world, where in my day we had these big, clunking, great big doors that then were separate from the doors. So obviously we had some kind of airlock going on there, but I never quite understood that. But thank you. Oh, sorry, I've got to stop.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.